Hi everyone, my name is Philippa Hughes and I am the organizer of Looking for America. It is a project in which we're trying to bring together people from across the political spectrum to engage in dialogue, to show America that this is possible, that we don't have to be polarized, and that Americans actually want to talk to each other. And the cool thing about today's conversation is that we've got people from across the country, not just within communities, talking to each other. So I'm pretty excited about bringing people together in dialogue across not just political divides, but geographic divides. So I'm pretty excited about that. Okay, before we get started though, I wanted to say that when we first started this project, we gathered together in the communities and we had dinner together, we broke bread together. And obviously, and sadly, this is not possible right now. And so our friends in Sioux City at an organization called One Siouxland decided to help us out with some breaking bread by sending us popcorn. This is some popcorn that is locally made in Sioux City, Iowa. It's from the Coated Kernels. And so everybody has got their popcorn. So we're gonna kind of break bread together. Everybody get your snacks out. My favorite flavor is caramel and white cheddar. I like the salty sweet combination. Anyway, oops, sorry for speaking with my mouth full. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just start out real quick with having each of you introduce yourselves and then sharing a story, like a personal observation of an unexpected act of kindness, something that surprised you. You know, we've heard a lot about all the amazing people bringing food to each other and, things like that, which I just feel it makes me feel like we can actually get through this together. Is there any, so I wanted to kind of think about, like, what are some unexpected things that you might have seen? Cindy, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm Cindy Hansen. I'm in Sioux City, Iowa. I work for a community college on the Nebraska side, so we're located right in a tri-state area. And the thing that comes to mind is we've been fairly insulated from the actual exposures and cases until about 3 weeks ago. And one of the first cases to come out impacted some of my students, and an adjunct faculty member, so she's a part-time instructor, reached out to me right away and she said, I have 2 students in my class whose parents are impacted and I want to send them some cash, but I don't want them to know where it's coming from. Can I funnel that through you? And so very unexpected, something that certainly was beyond what she was expected to do, or even that those students were expecting to receive. But she just wanted them to know that she cared, and she recognized that without their primary breadwinner, there might be some additional needs that they have.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's
wow.
amazing.
I do want to come back to that because I have a question that kind of relates to that. Vanessa, what's happening in El Paso?
So a couple of things. I live in a condo community. I would say probably about 75% of the residents here are older. And so the board of the HOA put together kind of a list so that we can check on each other, organize, trips to the grocery store. I spend a lot more time on my balcony now. So I've gotten to get to know neighbors that I've lived here for almost 4 years. There's only a handful that I know. And so now, I get to talk to them kind of regularly as they go on their walks. So we'll chat and check in on each other. So that's been a really nice surprise and kind of an effect of all of this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
How about you, Matt?
Hi, yeah, my name's Matt Johnson. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I work for Church World Service, which is a refugee resettlement agency here and across the country. I was thinking about this a lot, and there's been so many from the refugee and immigrant community that I couldn't narrow it down, but I did narrow it down just as you were talking. A judge locally issued a decree to have the detainees that are here that are asylum seekers released from the prison due to COVID and due to the fact that things were, I can't compete with that. No, it's great. And some of the community groups, even when it was communities that have traditional friction in other parts of the world have taken in people that they don't know, and provided food and shelter and care, and have really helped get them on a path towards potentially becoming asylees. So that has been really amazing, because this has hit everybody hard. Some folks are out of work, but it was a lot of effort towards, you know, sharing what they had, and that was really incredible.
That is incredible.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I really love hearing these stories. I think it's so important to share these kind of positive stories, because there is so much negativity around how we talk about COVID and the pandemic. And so I do think it's really important to say this stuff. Cindy, I wanted to go back to you because, you know, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, we've got another stimulus package about to come out, and there's a lot of disagreement about how, you know, how much should be in it and who should be getting the money and all of that stuff. I mean, it kind of makes me think about, you know, when I hear a story about people wanting to help financially, help their neighbors financially, why should we have to do, I'm just asking, I don't exactly have an opinion either way yet, but why should I have to like do that? Why doesn't our government helping us in those ways?
Right. I think that's an excellent question, and I don't have the answer either, I guess. I will say I think it's part of the culture in this area. For the most part, we come from farming backgrounds where there hasn't always been a reliable government safety net. And I know that may not seem like it to people who come from urban areas, really like farmers get everything, but there's just always inherent with that a lot of risk, which means that we also have to be optimists and community oriented. So as a result, I mean, it just is kind of ingrained in us that if you see someone else in need, you reach out and help, because tomorrow you might be that one that's in need. And so it's just really ingrained in us that we don't always look not necessarily to a government to be able to do that, but to look at how can we do our small part. That being said, I think everyone that's received a stimulus check here is probably cashing it. So we'll take that assistance too, but I think, you know, I think the first gut reaction is, what can I do?
Interesting. Vanessa, I mean, El Paso is a much bigger community than Sioux City. Are you seeing that kind of sharing of resources?
Oh yeah. So we have a number of kind of more affluent families that have foundations. So we've seen a lot of these different foundations working together, which has not always been the case. So they come together, and then to encourage others to donate, their matching donations. So at the firm I work with, I manage all of our community giving. So we found out about the two foundations coming together to match. And so the partners decided that we would also match. And then seeing the employees, I'm always surprised at this. You know, we work in accounting, and because of all of the new regulations coming through, we've been busier than we could have ever imagined. So for the most part, our staff, like nobody's been laid off, nobody's been furloughed. There's been no shortage of work to be done. So it's exciting to see our associates who, you know, financially are in a good place, really paying it forward. And even our admin staff that make the least amount, they're usually the ones that give the most. So it was exciting to see, you know, we partnered with El Pasoans Fighting Hunger, which is a local food bank. And we were able to give them, I think with all of the matching, it came out to close to $10,000 without even needing to push it. People were really excited to do that. So that's been really nice to see.
I'm going to go to you, Matt, but, you know, what I really worry about is there are plenty of people who are falling through the cracks. Like not everybody gets the opportunity to have their neighbor take care of them, or might not be part of a really strong community. So that's what I worry about, is like the really vulnerable people in our communities. Matt, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that Lancaster is per capita the most charitable area in the country. when you work through it. We have an extraordinary give every year that raises $10 million in a single day.
Wow.
for local nonprofits and charities. It goes up every year. But I think that I'm seeing the same kind of push and pull that you're talking about, Cindy. This has always been a very insular community in all the good and bad ways. And so it was just expected that you help your neighbor and you don't wait on the government. But to your point, Philippa, I feel that push and pull a lot, which is, today I was reading a story and I got all teary-eyed about a 100-year-old man in England who raised $40 million for the National Health Service. And you go, wow, what sheer determination, and how sweet that people got behind that. And then you say, how is it possible that one of the most industrialized countries in the world needs to depend on this guy to come out? We're not talking about a nonprofit. We're talking about the government,
Right.
needing $40 million to push back against a crisis. So I completely agree. I mean, I think nonprofits, most of the time, what people here in Lancaster believe is that the nonprofits on the ground know the best way to get the funds out. And they're right about that most of the time, okay? But I do feel like that should not mean that we need to dismantle government programs, and it does not mean that we can't or shouldn't wade through the red tape that sometimes exists to get the money where it belongs, because this is an unprecedented crisis, and not any one person or any one group knows who's not receiving what needs to be received. So I feel that kind of tension that you feel. Like, on one hand, I'm just blown away by the generosity of the community, and that's something I never want to go away. On the other hand, there are systemic issues that are being exacerbated by this crisis, that have existed, that don't get solved by nonprofits, and that scream for the type of resources that the government can provide. I think it's interesting, for instance, that we've started a small business fund that the city is putting 1.5 million in, that people have donated a bunch of money towards, and we can't seem to find money to keep the small businesses alive. Or, for example, the city can't, this is nerdy stuff, but I think it matters. The city is looking for new ways to generate revenue other than property taxes. So this would be a wonderful time for us to be able to say to the government, hey, give us the power to do a luxury dining tax or a alcohol tax. And they're just like, nah. And so it just seems like we're going to continue to need the generosity of others when it's a pretty fairly easy fix. So I feel the same way that you do, that I want to be generous and I don't want the government to handle it all, but there needs to be a better way than, or Bezos asking for money for,
Let's
for his
come back to
employees.
Bezos.
Yes.
I will
Yeah.
come back to that, because that's a rant that I often can go off on.
Yes. So,
I wanted to, if I could comment on that too, when you talk about people falling through the cracks, it just brought back to me. So part of the government, the first package that went through the CARES Act was allocation of funds to higher education via the states, and half of those funds were to go directly to students, which is really exciting. The only way an institution could receive the funds is after they've distributed half of their allocation to students. So, which I think was great, that kind of put that emphasis on getting it to the people who it matters to, except as additional regulations started coming out about that, it was only people who fit this category and only people who fit that category. So the same people that fall through the cracks fell through the cracks yet again. So those students who aren't eligible for financial aid, whether it's because of their credit hour threshold, whether it's because of their status, their legal status threshold, whether it's because of their parents' status, whatever that might be, again, those people were not eligible. And I think the sad part about that is it makes it harder and harder for those people who actually really need resources to even want to come forward and ask, because it's another door slammed in their face. And that's been heartbreaking for me, because I know they're the ones who are working the hardest to try to figure out how to do this. And then to again say, oh, wait, sorry, just kidding. That's the frustrating part. And that's where I think it really is critical that we have the private part of it that we can then direct in whatever way we need to.
Mm-hmm.
And where nonprofits know where that is.
Vanessa, do you want to add to that? Or
I've spent a lot of time reading the regulations. So I work for an accounting firm. So part of what I've been doing during this time is reading the regulations, reading the clarifications, and then trying to summarize it for our clients that don't want to know how the sausage is made. So we have like a lot of clients that are bar owners.
Are what?
Are bar owners. So like their entire staff, I mean, typically made very good money. But because their salary was so small and they depended on tips, they're not able to receive the same amount. So I'm personally scared about opening up, but I also get to see this group of people that I know that have nothing else. And I don't, as much as I want to help, I have no idea what the solution is. I really don't. And I can see both sides of it, but don't have any clue how to get it done. I have never been so grateful not to be a leader at this point. Non-essential, just like put me in line, tell me what direction I need to go in, because I can't wrap my head around all of these moving pieces and how do you make everybody happy? You know, and under normal circumstances, that's difficult, but then you add in a pandemic and it's like, are you kidding me?
I mean, that does feel like kind of the crux of a lot of frustration is nobody seems to know the way forward. And we can be very vigilant about the virus and being, quarantined, et cetera, and also be very concerned about the fact that our economy is tanking. Like we can hold both of those contradictory, apparently contradictory ideas at the same time, but they're not contradictory. They're both true.
Yes.
Well, but don't you think, I mean, I think that this is where the really sad part comes in, which is the sort of political, and I mean that in the sort of capital P political sense, the horse race part gets in the way. I have a good friend who's a very conservative economist, and he says, that there are some obvious answers for how to balance this out. And when a government knows that a recession is afoot, which is never, except for when you have, something like this happen, that there are steps that you can take, but that they cross political lines or they run afoul of people's ideologies sometimes on both sides. And so then you get stuck with that politicization that makes it impossible to, you get an either or. And I see that coming in my social media feed. It's, we need to save business. We need to keep people safe, as if they're not even talking to each other. They're just like it's a weird protest, right? Like, open the economy, keep people safe. They don't seem to, align. We can clearly do both. Yeah.
Yes.
Cindy, were you going to say something?
No, I just wholeheartedly agree with that. Like, we are approaching this as it's one or the other, and we really need both. So.
And then it's weird because I was saying, oh, nobody knows, but actually, like you said, Matt, there are things we can be doing that we aren't doing. I am not the expert. Vanessa, as you said, you're not the expert, but there are people who know what to do, and apparently they can't seem to collaborate.
And from our firm, I serve on a committee that we're trying to come up with a plan on how we reopen the office. So Governor Abbott said, you guys want to open? You can open as of today. So he announced that like 2 weeks ago, and then we started to work, reading the CDC website, OSHA website, reading the governor's report. And if you just look at stuff on social media, it seems very polarized. So El Paso is very blue, Texas is very red. So there were a lot of people that were very upset about Governor Abbott's, announcement. But I read it. If you have problems sleeping, I will send it to you because it's a real snooze fest. But it was consistent with everything that the CDC said, everything that OSHA said, everything that our insurance provider said. Like, listen, you can do this if you want. If you can avoid it, you should. No one's going to force you to wear a mask, but you should. And so initially when we started putting together our plan, there were a lot of people that were kind of against it. And we started talking particularly about the masks, because it's a visual reminder of how things are a bit scarier. For my house, I can pretend like none of this exists. I'm on a staycation that has lasted altogether too long. But when we started reviewing all of the information and just kind of saying, okay, if you have something against wearing a mask, what do you suggest? And there was no suggestions. It's like, okay, so then we're all on board. If our clients absolutely have to come in for a meeting, then they have to respect that we're wearing masks. And what I found with some of the ones that I thought were going to be the most hesitant, speaking to them one-on-one, they're like, you know what, when I'm going to the grocery stores that are like super vigilant are the ones that I feel most comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So our Whole Foods, like they are not messing around. Like they're measuring your temperature and I'm like, yes, tell me how hot I am. And then I feel a little bit better, you know? And I think that that's the only way that we're going to be able to do this. Like, let's reopen. I want to go to a restaurant. Turns out that I was never actually overpaying for a drink because I'm a terrible bartender. Mm-hmm. So I want to go ahead and do that, but I want to do it in a safe way. And for us, like, I see that these small businesses like restaurants are really struggling. So I want to stay home. I want our staff to stay home so that we give them the room to open up. We do this slowly. And then, you know, obviously some of them aren't going to survive. And obviously there are some people that physically are not going to survive. And there are underlying issues for both. You know, a strong business can pivot, you know, and that's kind of what you have to do. And I've been really surprised at like how some of these businesses have tweaked their business plan and said, okay, I'm ready. Let's keep on doing this. And I'm like, yes, I'm trying to throw money at people as much as I can because I'm so blessed to be in a situation that I have a secure job. I was already making decent money. Now I've got a stimulus packet that I really didn't need. So I'm eating out a lot more, you know, doing Instacart so that people that, you know, are forced to do a job like that. And then I tip very well because I'm so grateful that I don't have to go and see the visual reminders with the mask and the plexiglass. And I can just stay home and pretend like this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you nailed something there, which is kind of another either or that I'd like to tear down, which is this idea that if there hadn't been a lockdown or there hadn't been a quarantine, all of these businesses would be fine, right? I mean, this is a once in a generation, once in 100-year kind of issue. And so, yeah, I mean, potentially we could talk about whether it's time to open or not open and so forth. But the idea that if we had just powered through this and, you know, and let people stay open for as long as they wanted, you know, the same response would have happened. You would have lost business. People would have been feeling unsafe about going. You would have maybe sickened people. And, you know, that could have been a death blow just as quickly as being closed and trying to figure something out. But I do appreciate what you say is like, for me, you know, it seems to me that business needs to be flexible, and for the businesses that have been able to turn on a dime and completely change the way that they operate, they have been doing incredibly well in this. And I know not every business has that ability and so forth, but there is something to the sort of capitalist spirit that supposedly that's what it's made for, is to be able to overcome issues. It's able to move on a dime in a way that the slow moving ship of government can't, you know? And so that has been something that has really been eye-opening to me, is that the people who bore down and said, I'm not going to go and complain. I'm not going to spend all my day on Facebook complaining. I'm going to sit with my team and I'm going to find a cool new way to operate in this new reality, are the ones that did well, I think. And again, I understand that not everybody can do that, but I think that it's been valuable to see how people have been spending their time either complaining about this or that or getting down to the work of changing things. And that's on either side of the political spectrum, I think.
Yeah. You know, speaking of capitalism, I am an avowed capitalist. I love capitalism. What I don't like is capitalism run amok. I like capitalism that makes people innovative. I like having nice things and working hard for those things. The capitalism run amok gives us like a Jeff Bezos and billionaires like him who I mean, what are they doing? Like, I just can't get my head around this idea that there's we could solve so many of these problems, like small businesses that are gonna fail, not just because they weren't innovative enough. I mean, there are many reasons why small businesses are gonna fail that have nothing to do with what they did. We could solve that problem if we didn't have this bizarro system where, corporations and people don't get taxed the way they should be. And like, and kind of related to that, why is the burden on me and you, Vanessa, and you, Matt, and Cindy, to be giving our hard-earned money away when they don't have to? I don't know. That's a rant.
Yeah, El Paso is a lot like that. El Paso has one of the highest property tax rates in, I think, for sure Texas, I don't know, compared to the rest of the country. And we have these companies coming in, and every time I turn around, the city council's like, oh, you got a new business, no tax for you. And I'm like, why? Like, we passed a bond almost 10 years ago. It was a quality of life bond. I had just moved back from El Paso, or moved back to El Paso from New York. And everything on there I saw, I was like, all right, I see this. Like, we do need better museums. The big one that stood out was a baseball field, right? I don't like baseball. It's like golf is the worst, and then baseball is right next to it. But I voted for it. I was like, absolutely, this is something what we need. I don't have children. It included a children's museum. I have no intentions of going to a children's museum as an adult by myself. Like, that's just not going to happen. But I voted for it, and we're paying through the nose for it. 10 years later, the arena is up. It's great. We've got a soccer team. That's been way more enjoyable than the baseball. But, the city continues to push it onto, one, the small group of affluent families that I'm super grateful that are so, so generous. And then the rest of us. But then we've got like these larger companies that are coming from outside of El Paso. And I'm like, what did you do to deserve this? Like, you need to earn your keep. I can understand for like the first year or so just to get it going, because our community does tend to be a little bit poorer. But we've showed up to everything, and then we also have Juarez. So Juarez, like our sister city, has come through, and we've got the money. We just typically haven't had anything to spend it on before. And now it's happening. But again, we've got these large businesses, and I'm like, listen, I'm glad that you're here, but what exactly are you bringing to the table that's making my life so much better that you have earned this amount? And why do I keep on paying your bills? It's hard.
Yeah. Cindy?
Oh, it rings true for so much. So I am on a board of directors for an organization that receives funds from casinos. So Iowa has a really unique arrangement in that casinos can only operate if they have a nonprofit entity that holds their gambling permit. So they're required to fund that nonprofit with a percentage of their revenue, which has been a huge boon to a lot of nonprofits in our county because it was a tremendous revenue source. We annually give away about $2 million just from this one source. Well, in the last 2 months, casinos have all been shut down. So there is no revenue at a time when nonprofits have a tremendous need. And so it's been really interesting on that board to hear the differences of opinion, because we had committed to, when you talk about a park, we had committed a pretty substantial amount to development of a riverfront project. And here we are at this point when we know our nonprofits are struggling to be able to provide the services that they need, and we have no additional revenue. And we're sitting out here with a commitment that also has a caveat that if our revenue is interrupted, we can withdraw from that commitment. And so we're starting to see this dichotomy of, is it that quality of life? And does quality of life mean a park, or does it mean providing someone with food on their table and transportation to the doctor and healthcare and all of those types of things? Or is it a playground next to the river? So it's really, really interesting on how that's really bringing that to light.
Yeah, I think that the experience here is not surprisingly pretty much the same. I've been watching the net worth of some of those billionaires you're talking about go up by hundreds of millions of dollars throughout this. There was that shocking article that if trends hold, which we don't have any reason to believe that they'll hold for that long, that Bezos could be the first trillionaire, right, in 2026. And that really gets at this point that exactly, I mean, and we should see it all along, not just in these crises. The search for the Amazon 2 headquarters was just generally like the most naked grab for information, sensitive planning information, tax base, all of that stuff. And I'm close enough to friends in New York who fought against it in Long Island City. And at first I had to admit, I was like, you guys are dumb. That's going to bring 50,000, and then when I really started thinking about it, I was like, I'm not sure it's a worthwhile trade-off. And you're exactly right. Like, we have all of these stories of everyday Americans that are sacrificing a lot, raising money, and I have not seen anything from that class of people. And I agree with you that the sort of unhelpful thing about criticizing billionaires and millionaires is attacking them as people rather than attacking the system that created them. And people forget that all of the time, that we shouldn't be mad that someone took advantage of the existing system to get to where they are. We should be mad that that system allows it, right? So when you maybe are on the liberal side of things and you say billionaires and millionaires should not exist, that sounds like just straight class warfare and not boy, the system needs change. But clearly the system needs changed if these guys are able to sit on record profits because of the scenario that we're in and not really contribute in any meaningful way, or ways that are that are really just cosmetic.
For the record, I don't think they should die. I do believe.
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah. No, exactly.
Not personal.
But there are people who ideologically think, what would be wrong with a trillionaire existing? You know what I mean? And my answer to that, which is that capitalism can't work well with that kind of huge wealth inequality. It doesn't work like it's supposed to if people have that, because they're able to monopolize, and we know what happens with that.
Yeah, that is no longer capitalism.
That's right. It's oligarchy, right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I've got one of our tax partners. It's during tax season. I love listening to his conversations because we have clients and they have to pay taxes. And so when I first got into the accounting industry, I was like, how do you have that conversation? And it's very funny because he congratulates them. Oh yeah, congrats. You had a great year. So this is what you owe. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of difficult to argue with that. It's like, oh yeah, I did. And if you're planning it right, then you know exactly how much you owe. And if you waited to the last minute and you've got the penalties, like that was a decision that you made. Yeah. But the whole reason that you have a tax bill is because you had a successful year. Mm-hmm. Congratulations. And the first time I heard him say it, I was like, oh, does that work?
Good social psychology. Great. I want to get back a little bit to our earlier bit when we were talking about marginalized communities and the impact on them of the pandemic. As I think we all know that like brown and Black people are bearing the brunt of the disease. And so, I just keep going back to this idea of like, it's easy for us to talk about reopening the economy when we are not bearing that as much of the brunt of this. Any thoughts on that?
There's a couple of things that come to mind for me. So Siouxland, Sioux City, and our surrounding area is very much a blue-collar workforce. Food processing is by far our #1 industry, and that includes meat packing as well as a whole other several different types of food processing. So we have a lot of people that work in close contact and close quarters and make decent money doing that, but yet there's risk that's inherent with it, even outside of a pandemic. So it's been interesting just watching over the last month when we've really started to have exposure and community spread come into our community. Earlier conversations were a lot more about how do we educate, how do we provide information, how do we stop people from gathering for cultural gatherings that are really important. And so there was a lot of conversation about that. And then when we started to see some exposure and community spread happening, I was really anticipating that we're going to see blame because people have continued this. And I was surprised that I really didn't. Instead, what I saw, which I was not any more happy about or comfortable with, was we blamed the employers, that they didn't do enough to prevent. And is there some truth to that? Probably. Is there some truth that community spread happened when family gatherings happened? Probably. Is there truth that community spread happened when somebody just went to the grocery store? Probably. I mean, there's truth to all of that, but to single out and zero in on one, I think is challenging. But I was pleasantly surprised that we didn't seek to blame a people group. The other thing that has surprised me is since that time, you talked about wearing masks and things. None of our governors in our tri-state area have ever mandated closure of, except for some isolated businesses, and nor required quarantine at home unless you had been exposed. So we've got no mandates for masks or that sort of thing. And so we were talking about, as we open our school, what are we going to do if students have a very passionate opinion about wearing a mask or not wearing a mask? And so it's been interesting since that conversation. I really just started to look, and I am surprised, but not, after I reflect on it, not terribly surprised that the people that I see being more diligent about social distancing, about precautions, are people who are people of color. The people I see walking around without a mask, hugging each other, look like me. And I think that says something about maybe our entitlement, maybe our privilege, but it's very interesting to me. And I think, well, good for us that we haven't blamed this on somebody else, because the people who aren't doing what we're supposed to do are me.
Matt, you work in the refugee community. Can you talk about how people are managing their response there?
Yeah, I think the most powerful thing that I've noticed is that there has been this rush among refugee leaders to make sure that they and their communities are more informed, more resourced, and generally more prepared than other communities for exactly the reasons that Cindy mentioned. Right? They know that they could be scapegoated even though they've been in the country for 20 years. It's not like they brought it with them when they were resettled. And the sad part about that is they do see that dichotomy of protesters gathering maskless with guns at the Capitol, and then having the audacity to think that they are the ones that are not educated on what's going on. I'll give you an example. A lot of my leaders, people have said to me, well-meaning, people have said to me, boy, I bet, misinformation is a huge issue in the communities you serve. And I'm like, I didn't see any refugees out burning down 5G cell towers because they spread the disease. You know what I mean? And so I've had communities who have felt, on one hand, I love the initiative. The Bhutanese Nepali community puts out a nightly newscast about COVID-19 information, how to squashing misinformation as soon as it comes out. A lot of refugee groups have been making food for first responders and for nurses. And while that is generally part of the giving and communal nature and family nature of their communities, there is this sneaking back of the head, idea that they need to demonstrate their worth in these times, or else they could be right back to being the moochers. And so it's really sad to me that on one hand, they naturally want to do this, but not without the idea that they want to explicitly push back against a political narrative about their roles in society. And that is really tough for me, because they say, we want to show the president that we are part of the team and we're fighting. And that shouldn't be how you have to prove yourself in these times, because as you say, Cindy, the people that are being lionized are the people that are going without masks, because it's such an affront to their freedoms to be
Right.
asked to care about someone. And I've been thinking about that a lot as we've been talking about how we reframe these issues, you know, and how everything becomes part of a culture war. You know, it's the same thing about like misgendering people or using the proper pronouns or something. It's not a big thing. It's not like a big, I'm forcing something on you. It's just basic courtesy that we always pride ourselves on as a country, that we, yes, we have freedom, but we also come together, you know? And so if the mask is such a feeling of oppression for you, and there are refugees in the community going, let me tell you about my story before I got here. Let's talk about oppression. You know what I mean? Like, you can't go to the Chili's if you want to. Let me tell you about what I've been through. And so they see the incongruity there, though they are struggling with how to live alongside of it.
Very good point, Matt.
It does provide a tremendous opportunity for teaching civil discourse, and that's kind of where I've come from. So we share our facility with another higher education institution, and we've got different philosophies, and that came up. Who's going to intervene if students are having a disagreement or somebody thinks someone else should wear a mask? I said, I think that's a wonderful opportunity for us to educate on civil discourse. How can we disagree and do so respectfully and honoring and listening to what the other person has to say?
Yeah. Vanessa, El Paso occupies a really unusual sort of geographic space. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening with your sister city Juarez, and is there anything happening back and forth anymore? Tell us about that.
No. So basically, unless you can prove that you have a reason to be going back and forth across the border, things have been shut down.
And just for a little context, I mean, when I visited, you could go back and forth. It was very porous, actually. Like, I went and had dinner one night over there, and it was fun.
Yeah, when we went downtown for the restaurant that we were at, we could walk to Juarez in less than 20 minutes. So, I mean, if you think about it, I don't think that the Mexico side has been quite as diligent as the US side. So if I wanted to, I could probably go over there and then fairly easily come back. But that was already an issue prior to this because of the current political environment. So that part, it makes me really sad because I don't know how we're going to recover from that. Because as soon as you close it down, it's just that much more difficult to open it back up. And you know, living in El Paso and being so close, you know, so if you look at Texas, we're right here. So we really don't have a lot to do with Austin and Dallas and Houston. We have more to do with Mexico and New Mexico. So Las Cruces, you can drive there in 20 minutes. So it's been interesting to see the varied responses. New Mexico was typically, you know, enforcing rules about 2 or 3 days before Texas was. And then Mexico, I'm not really sure what's been going on with them. They've had significantly more deaths, not as many confirmed cases, but I think that has more to do with testing availability. And for them, I mean, they're so much poorer. So it's difficult to quarantine. You know, how do you stay home? You know, and a lot of my friends, they've got, you know, housekeepers. So like my mom, her housekeeper lives in Juarez. She can't come, you know. So my mom has been sending her money because she knows, like, she's got a disabled child, her husband doesn't work. Like, my mom is one of the few people that she can depend on. She's a very hard worker, amazing person, you know, did everything legally, but now because she lives in Juarez, it's so much cheaper. She can't come, you know, and both my mom and stepdad have, you know, heart conditions. And so it's just unwise. So that's been, the 3 sister cities have all been under different rules and different levels this whole time.
Yeah, interesting. As we wind down, I thought we could try to end on a positive note and maybe share a little bit about what do we see for the future? Is there a positive future? I mean, of course there is. I am an optimistic person. At some point, this is going to end, and we are going to have we're going to go back to normal. What is that going to look like? What do you think?
I'll say that during this time, it's forced me to make a real effort to connect with people. So I have a regularly scheduled kind of Zoom. I don't know if you guys have house party. It's way fun. But I've noticed that instead of just kind of relying on running into people randomly, even people that I thought were more acquaintances, we've been making a real effort to connect and check on each other. And I hope that that's something that continues once we're all able to get out there, the new normal.
Yeah, me too. What do you think, Cindy?
I think that's certainly something I look forward to. As far as what it will look like, it's so hard to predict and to really think about that. Looking back 60 days, would I have expected that we'd be in the situation we are right now? Absolutely not. And so even as we're looking at the start of our fall semester, 90 days from now seems like an eternity. But I do think normal will be different, and I think that could be a very good thing. I think we talk about, how people have reinvented business models. I think also people are reinventing what does work-life balance look like, because we have had such an imbalance for so long that I think all of a sudden we've slowed down, and I think that slower pace does mean, as Vanessa said, we connect with people more intentionally. We remember to care instead of just being filled with busyness. And that's the thing that I guess I'm trying to guard myself from returning to normal of 1,000 things on my schedule and, maybe home after work one night of the week instead of, that was the hardest adjustment, I think, for me. Like, oh my gosh, I have to cook dinner every day. I don't have a lunch meeting 4 days out of the week. I have to cook lunch too. So those kinds of things that I think are a positive in that it's just really refocused. Where's my time supposed to be?
Yeah, I'm, as you know, Philippa, I come from a philosophy background, and I can't help but kind of look at these things through that kind of lens. And I think that what has happened, as happens frequently, I think, is it's ripped back the kind of noise, and we're kind of learning what is underneath it all. And some people are horrified to learn that they are interdependent on everybody else, and some people are being reminded, and other people are reminded that we are, that no man is an island or no woman is an island, and so it says a lot about your reaction to all of this, which one of those that you fall into. And I keep reminding myself that despite all of the political heat, there's no light there. And so I look at the things, and it says, 70% of people say we're worried about opening up too quickly and not following safety things. In our state, 70% of people are saying the governor is handling it well and being cautious and so forth. So the loud voices that we're hearing that are just, and when I see it, and I hate to say it like this because I never like to psychoanalyze or reduce somebody down to something, when I see that person with the gun in the legislative room, I basically see someone that is horrified by the revelation that we need each other and that we can't just be these individual atoms floating around in the world, and that, would love to believe that something about my immune system or my superior or whatever will keep me from getting this, or I can do this alone and figure it out alone, right? So I think what I like about it is that it seems like generally people have adjusted to the fact that we need each other, and we're reminded of it a lot, but we forget about it, I think, as you said, Cindy, very quickly, that we are interdependent. So I'm hoping that what the new norm looks like is that we are not getting by as a community unless there's a basic standard that everybody's getting by on, and that we understand that these sometimes described as parasitic relationships go both ways. You know, the people that you're talking about that are typically seen as titans of industry and self-made people are actually parasitic on all the rest of us because they are gaining, you know, and so the idea that we are interdependent is saying nobody gets to be so up here or so down here that they can't have a meaningful existence in the richest country that has ever existed in the world, right? So I agree with you. I think that hopefully we have a more nuanced view of capitalism. That's number one for me. And it is more in line with the robust capitalism that you describe rather than the, you know, everybody has an absolute right to do whatever and, you know, whatever. I hope that it's a reminder that, you know, this is not going to be the first time this happens. It's going to keep happening, I think, pandemics and in a globalized world. And finally, just that we need to cut through these, you know, mostly rhetorical arguments. And they have wound in so tightly to our identity that we don't even recognize them as rhetorical anymore. You know, when you say, again, when I talk to someone who's had their entire family killed in front of them and ran off in the night, that this guy feels oppressed, it's objectively not oppression. I'm sorry, you know. And so in that case, it would be learning a little humility and learning a little bit about what it means to be part of a society.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. I agree with all of you. And I really appreciate you joining this conversation. You know, I'll kind of end on this note. I mean, earlier I said, you know, I think we want to hear from regular, normal, ordinary people because there are so many loud voices on our polarized extremes. Yes, we are polarized, but those polarized people, those groups are actually relatively small. There's a study that says that, you know, 70% of us Americans are the exhausted majority, that we actually do want to talk to each other. We do want to find solutions together. And for whatever reason, we're not loud enough. And maybe that's just inherent in being sort of not on the polarized ends. So that is my personal goal, is we have got to activate the 70% of us Americans who actually want to work together and be in community together. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation to inspire others. We did it.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this.
Yes, it was so fabulous.
Thank you. And let's just keep talking. Thank you so much.
Please.
Thank you.
You guys take care and be safe.
Great to meet you all.
Yes, it was awesome to meet you all. Yeah, and thank you for the popcorn.